Let's talk about another politician now. Rachel Reeves. She's been in China saying growth is the #1 mission of this government. The fiscal rules laid out in the budget are non-negotiable. Economic stability is the bedrock for economic growth and prosperity. The Treasury added that the Chancellor, I should say, added that making Britain better off will be at the forefront of her mind during her visit. Well, Laurie Laird is with me now. She's an economist and breaks all these things down so people with my simple mind can understand it. Laurie, you've been watching Rachel Reeves, so we don't have to. Has she been saying anything new?
Yes, and you're welcome for that, Peter. No, she hasn't said anything new at all. And you know, I think part of the problem of digressing a tiny bit before I've even started is Rachel Reeves is now in a position where she has to deliver some pretty difficult news and hasn't found the right tone in which to do this. And it's unfortunate that we live in an era where politicians speak to cameras, but it is part of the job. And what we heard from Rachel Reeves in China was that sort of the half-baked things that we always have. We want to cooperate more with China. Growth. We're going to create growth. We all talk about growth, but it's not entirely clear that Rachel Reeves or anyone else entirely understands what that means. Now, she knew that she had to talk about the fact that she went to China during this period that interest rates, government borrowing rates, ran up in a hurry. I don't think she should have stayed behind. I do not think that the economy is in any sort of a crisis. Staying back would have, kind of pointed to a sense of panic. But she does need to address this situation, and all that she said is that she's not going to provide a running commentary on what's happening in financial markets. I think that she can do better than that because it appears that she's sort of brushing people's concerns under the carpet.
I think that's right, and certainly in regard to the markets. I mean, we had her deputy, Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, saying the other day that the markets are working as they're meant to. The cost of government debt has gone up. That's bad news for consumers because it all does matter. In terms of China itself, I mean, their own economy isn't doing brilliantly, is it?
Thank you for pointing this out. This is a really big point, and we're seeing a lot of coverage about, perhaps what could come of better cooperation between the UK and China. But you have to remember, a lot of Chinese industry, the sort of industry that would invest outside of Chinese borders, is either linked to the state, either indirectly or directly. The Chinese state doesn't have a whole lot of extra money right now. It's also very concerned about money leaving China because that will put pressure on the Chinese currency. China has said that it wants to, the Chinese economy is slowing. It's in its weakest state in years. No doubt about that. The government has finally acknowledged that, and they have said that what they want to do is try and spur consumption, get Chinese people to start spending more. Chinese are not feeling particularly confident, a little lack of confidence in their economic leadership there as well as here. But the Chinese government is looking at stimulating its economy and spending money domestically. So there isn't a great sense of, economic adventurism in China at the moment.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we sort of think of China, or a lot of people have thought of China as a sort of panacea. They'll get the growth, they'll get the investment. Obviously, that's without even considering the human rights problems, the many issues of spying as well. Look, they spy on us, we spy on them. I'm sure that's the case. But certainly, this is not just a catch-all. And I mean, I imagine, I suppose, I don't know what your thoughts are, but some people are certainly happy that these discussions about investment have continued or have started up again after about 5 years when they haven't happened. Other people say, hold on a second, China created, in many people's view, the COVID in a lab, so there's plenty of evidence for that, so they should be paying us reparations. I mean, we have a very complicated relationship with China, and actually the Chinese themselves, I think, could be forgiven for being a bit confused about what a relationship with them is, because it's changed so many times in terms of British politicians over the last while. I mean, you even look at someone like Liz Truss, for example, who has changed her mind almost completely on China in the last 10 years.
Yeah, and Rachel Reeves made sure to use the word pragmatic more than once. We want a pragmatic relationship with China. Very interesting because she didn't say a whole lot in her speech, but her equivalent number, the vice premier, talked at length and talked about a lot of the areas for cooperation. He talked about working with the UK on the World Trade Organization, on bilateral lending, on the Asian Investment Bank. It's hilarious. These are not organizations that China particularly participates participates in. China is not a multilateralist. And to hear the Chinese saying, this is how we want to work with Britain, and Britain not saying much about it at all, where Britain has tended to be across the world a leader in globalization, a leader in free trade. It seemed really odd to have those positions reversed. But I think the main thing that I'm seeing from Rachel Reeves this week is that things look disjointed. It doesn't feel like she has she talks about growth. It doesn't feel like she has a sense of how to achieve that. And it's very frustrating because this party's been in opposition for 14 years. Rachel Reeves has some financial experience. She once worked for the Bank of England. Yet it feels like we're still pedaling. There's still lots of U-turns. There doesn't seem to be a grown-up plan for how to get the economy on some sort of track. And that's sort of unforgivable after all this time in opposition. I feel the same way when I hear Wes Streeting say, let's consult people on how to make the NHS better. And that's
it's like, why don't you know?
Couple of years.
Yeah, why don't you know?
Where have you been?
And
what
also,
have you been doing?
Well, exactly. Also, Rachel Reeves saying in the regulators, asking the regulators how to get economic growth. That's not really their job. And also, if you work for a regulator, you're probably not going to be a great mind in terms of growth. It's a very, very weird thing. Laurie, let me ask you about
I'm so glad you brought the regulator up, but I'm sorry to repeat what you just said because I think this is being so underreported. And in fact, the top securities regulator is on this trip to China. You don't want your regulator to encourage growth. The regulator's there to take away the parcel, right? When things get,
yes.
They're not there to spike the drain.
It's very strange. It's very strange. Let's talk about another politician, also someone who is very interested in China. And indeed, thank you to Brad in Cambridge, who says I have to smile every time you say China in the style of Trump. We do that.
I did the same.
We do that in this house as well. That's really the only word I can do in a Trump voice. There's only
glad to hear it.
There's only two words I can do in Starmer, which is the Metropolitan Police. That's the way he talks. He always says Metropolitan Police that way.
I bet you can say toolmaker. Yeah.
he certainly can. He's mentioned it enough, Laurie. In 9 days' time, Donald Trump is going to be president again, president of the United States for a second time. The economic picture for America is going to change dramatically. How do you predict it's going to change for the United Kingdom in relation to the United States, Laurie?
I mean, this is a really tricky one because everything that Trump has proposed, specifically these tariffs that he indiscriminately wants to put on people, countries that displease him, this has to be inflationary. And there are no examples in our history where that hasn't been inflationary. Tariffs mean that people who import goods pay a higher price. They tend to pass that on to consumers. Add to that his promise of deporting undocumented workers, which could be as many as 1 in 6 in the U.S. population. There's already a bit of a labor shortage in the U.S., so this will push up. If you can get rid of these people, I think Trump is a little bit optimistic on how many he could forcibly remove. Okay. But it will push up labor costs. That will also add to inflation. Now, stick with me, and I know you get glazed over when I talk about bond yields a little bit, government borrowing rates.
I just feel guilty.
Peter, I've been working with you on this.
Yes.
But any sort of inflation in the U.S. means that people who lend to the U.S., they buy these things called bonds. These bonds have an interest rate on them. But if you foresee inflation, you want a higher interest rate because inflation is going to eat up some of your return. This is likely to happen in the U.S. And in fact, after we had a strong jobs report in the U.S. yesterday, bond yields soared in the U.S. The U.S. sort of sets the tone when it comes to this government borrowing sort of markets. So the U.K. does follow the U.S. So if we see greater inflation in the U.S., we're likely to see bond yields in the U.S., that's government borrowing rates, in the U.K. follow what's happening in the U.S. So even though Donald Trump's policies seem to be domestically oriented, the U.S. being the biggest economy in the world, its policies reverberate.